So welcome to the panel called On the Death of Scientific Visualization, also known as the Death Panel. So we're very lucky to have some distinguished high-ranking geeks on the panel, distinguished selection of geeks. Mike Kirby, David Laidlaw, myself, Klaus, Mueller, Han-Wei, Shen, and Anders Ynnerman. I'm trying. Mike Kirby could not join us today due to a motor vehicle accident, unfortunately. Yeah. So let's dig right in. Is it there? Oh, okay. Let's try that again.
Sorry. Oh, God. Is that what you want?
Yeah, that's the one. I guess a lot of people have seen this beautiful visualization. It's not that easy to see right now. It's easier to see when you're playing with it on your desktop, but it's called CiteVis 2 from John Stasko's group. A very beautiful visualization. And I was playing with it in my office, as one does. And you can visualize citations. So you try to find your own paper in the different tracks, and then you see if anybody's ever cited your paper. So that's the exercise I was doing. And I showed it to some PhD students. And I said, look at this cool thing from Georgia Tech. And yeah, they said, oh, that's cool. And I said, look at the interaction. I'm not showing the interaction right now. And one of the students, the beautiful Richard Roberts, said, oh, look, you can see the increasing InfoVis track and the increasing VAST track, but it looks like SciVis is shrinking. So you can see at the bottom the SciVis track, and somewhere around 2004, it starts to contract, generally speaking. I don't know how well that's showing up for the audience, but you can see a peak around 2004, and then a general contraction trend until today. And I looked at this year's. I know I'm using my psychic powers right now, and I know what you're thinking collectively. Oh, well, what about this year, Bob? Am I right? Yeah, definitely. So I counted 30 papers, the SciVis papers this year, and by my non-professional judgment, it's the lowest number in the history since these numbers have been counted since around 1995. So I thought, wow, that's a cool panel topic right there, as one does. So it raises some questions, and that's what we're gonna answer all these questions today, because it's gonna be great. So will the number of papers keep decreasing in the SciVis track? What could be the cause of the decrease? Should we be concerned? Is anything wrong? Are any changes necessary? How does this compare to the historic growth of other successful conferences? And what might we learn from this? And just for fun, I did look at some other conferences, the number of papers appearing at other conferences. So here's one that you probably all know about, IEEE CVPR, a high impact vision conference. And you can see a trend, an upward trajectory trend, an expansion trend historically. That's the SIG graph, a SIG graph example from the last 10 or 15 years. It shows a general upward trend. Here's another one. I just like this one better. It's IEEE CVPR again, but I just like the 3D bar chart better. 3D is so much cooler than 2D. Wait, that was a different panel. And Tobias Eisenberg was kind enough to show us this nice visualization that shows the different tracks and the number of citations for each of the tracks. And if you can read it, you know, there's a decrease. It looks like there's a decrease in some of the in some of the areas we're talking about today. So that's it from my side. We're going to have our first distinguished speaker, David Laidlaw. We're going to go in alphabetical order. So David, Klaus, Han-Wei, Shen. No, it's surname. Han-Wei, Shen, and then Anders.
Technology worked, it's good. Well, happy Horseless Carriage Day. You guys probably didn't know it was Horseless Carriage Day, but I had to do something after a happy Wednesday, which I knew would be coming from the first speaker. So I arrived at my bed and breakfast on this trip, my Airbnb, to find something a little bit unusual next to the bed. Oftentimes you check in and there's literature about restaurants, and there's literature about sights to see and things to do. This is what I found. This is a first for me. I've never gotten literature from a funeral home as I checked into an Airbnb. And at first I was a little nervous because I thought, I hope I don't need this. And then I realized, wait, I do need this, and here it is. So, and I think this is really a message. This is a message that, you know, SciVis, something's dead. And the most likely culprit is probably SciVis. Oops. I don't know why this always happens to me. Okay, so the premise of the panel here is that maybe SciVis is dying. I'm going to try to answer two questions. You know, that one's a yes or no one. And then the other question is, well, what do we do? And as DataVis Bob mentioned, SciVis publication counts are going down. Bill Lorenson foretold this sort of before they started going down, I think in his Death of SciVis paper, where he talked about how we're kind of running out of customers. And so there's evidence of that. I think there's also, if you look at the last graph that, that Tobias gave to us that shows the total number of publications at the conference and in TVCG, it's not maybe so dire. But it is true that SciVis numbers are going down. So I want to sort of speculate a little bit about why that might be happening. I have a couple of conjectures. One is that there's a lot of tracks, and maybe some of the other tracks are more compelling. Maybe something's cooler than SciVis. Maybe something's more specific or more targeted to the actual topic you have for your paper, so you send it somewhere else. Maybe you have this impression that SciVis reviewers are too harsh, and so you're going to go to a different venue and get the nice reviewers to review your paper. So I think all of those are pretty likely, and that kind of shifting is, you know, pretty common as fields change over time. We're looking at trends that have happened over a long time. It's sort of natural that SciVis would be the one where that would happen, since it was the first, and since most of the other channels have kind of, or tracks have kind of emerged from SciVis and taken a group of people or of papers with them. So that's kind of my first conjecture. I'm not going to actually, well, we'll get to the end, and when we get to the end. My second conjecture is, okay, there's some hot new topics. There's machine learning and data science. They're going to handle everything. All of VIS is dead. We're not going to need people anymore. We're just going to give it to computers, and the computers are going to give us back the answers. So maybe in 50 years, I should be dead then, so it'll be safe to, nobody can tell me that I was wrong. You know, really, I think we all believe that people are going to be needed for this kind of analytic process for a long time. It may change, the process may not be exactly the same, but it's pretty clear to me that people will be involved. And it's great that machine learning is bringing some of the maybe more repetitive things, or the things that involve huge amounts of memory or huge amounts of computation to help people do their analysis, but it's not going to get rid of the analysis altogether. I'm reminded of the fear that all of the software jobs were going to be exported out of America, but it's not, they're not all gone. There's a lot of people still doing software in the United States and everywhere for that matter. So I think that those particular fears are overblown. So I kind of don't believe that, that conjecture. I think there's good evidence that it's not true. So my third conjecture is that we're done. SciVis is finished. There's no more knowledge to create. We've created it all, or there's no more interesting knowledge to create. And I do kind of see a little bit of evidence of this. I find that Bill Lorenson sort of was talking about this in his paper, I think. I find that there are fewer potential collaborators who come to me with hard problems and say, oh, help me, I don't know what to do. And the ones that do well, there's still some, which is a good thing. I think that, you know, in a sense, we are done with some things. There's a lot more software out there for people to just pick up, take to their labs, plug their data in, and get out some visual answers that they can, you know, they can do all by themselves. Here I'm reminded of, you know, the web, people self-publishing, people creating animations. These were all things that 20 years ago you couldn't even think about doing without, you know, crazy amounts of work and special expertise. And now my son makes animations on the, you know, on the floor of our playroom and posts them on YouTube, and people can look at them. And he did this when he was 7. So, you know, visualization is a little bit the same in the sense that a lot of those people who used to come to us with problems that they weren't able to do themselves now can do a lot of that themselves. But I do still have collaborators who come to me with hard problems. They're harder problems than they used to be. They're different problems. They're not like, oh, I have this CT data set, how can I look at it? Okay, I think we're pretty much, we've got some really solid solutions for that. Maybe not every particular kind of CT data set and every kind of scientific problem. Certainly there are areas to fill in that area too. But they come with, I have 1,000 CT data sets, what do I do? I have 20,000 simulation runs of something, and I have to be able to understand what's going on in them in 20 minutes. So these are a different kind of problem, a different class of problem. So I don't think we're done. We're done with some of the problems, but we still have plenty of hard things to work on. And a lot of them still remind me of Fred Brooks's Computer Scientist as Toolsmith paper from way back. And anybody who's had me as an advisor has read that paper, maybe multiple times. I do send copies of that to many people, and I commend it to all of you if you haven't read it, or if you haven't read it recently. It talks about going out and finding those collaborators, those folks that have a hard scientific problem, and solving that problem on their terms, and from it, getting richer computer science research. I think Ben Ynnerman has a similar message as part of his new book, which he talked about in the Believe session this week, that in-depth collaborative case studies can be really valuable to get SciVis research going and doing interesting things. So this third conjecture, are we done? I don't think we're done, but it's not quite as it always was. So my fourth and last conjecture is that maybe the field's going through kind of a phase change. Maybe we're maturing and the type of problem is not quite the same. And actually that's kind of consistent with all of the conjectures, and it's really my personal favorite. I feel like, you know, the one thing you can count on is change, and I think that's happening. It's going to happen to all the tracks. In fact, it's probably already happening to all the tracks, although some of the changes are turning into new tracks. So when I talked about having 20,000 simulation results or 1,000 CT scans, well, there's LDAV, and that's something that's emerged, you know, in the last, I don't remember how long ago it started, maybe 5 or 6 years. So maybe in a sense, because of these changes, SciVis is dying. But I think that this death is really kind of an opportunity for a sort of a rebirth. So as they would say about, you know, the kings on their tombs, SciVis is dead, long live SciVis, the next SciVis. Blah, 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 right? Yak, yak, yak. What does this all mean? What should we be doing? How do we reinvent SciVis? So that's the second question I want to try to answer. And I have a really, I don't know, a simple sounding solution which I think is actually really difficult. So I think we need to do good research and present it well. That's it. So, okay, now I spent 30 years now trying to understand what that means. And so maybe it's not quite as simple as those 20 words. And I spend a lot of time teaching students what it means and writing reviews, trying to help people who have submitted papers figure out what it means. So it's really, that's a really hard thing. It's many, many careers of work. In fact, it really is what we are trying to do in our careers, is to understand what it means to do good research. So, but let me just go into it a tiny bit, because I can't spend a career up here today. That was not long enough. The session isn't long enough for that. So there really are two things that you need for good research. One, you need to make new human knowledge that adds to the collective human knowledge of our whole race. That sounds kind of scary, but really that's what you have to do. And the second thing that new knowledge has to have is it has to have some significance. So it can't just be, I made a new algorithm for calculating isosurfaces, and it's, you know, and then you look at it and it's full of bugs and it's 3 times slower than the other algorithms. That's not really very interesting new information or new knowledge for the human race. So sometimes the importance is obvious. I found a new species of animal. That's, most people would not argue that that's not an important addition to human knowledge. But sometimes you actually have to demonstrate it or have some proof of it or at least explain why it's important. My algorithm, it's faster, it's more accurate, it's more effective in some way. People can get some new information about it. It solves a problem that's not quite the same as the problem that people were solving before. Or I have a new theory. My new theory actually explains some things that the old theory didn't explain. It's stronger, or it explains them in a different way that can be generalized differently. So those are the kinds of things that give you a sense of the importance of something. And also talk about how it's going to apply, how it's going to change the world. So that's the good research part. The presented well part, I think, is actually, if you've done the good research part right, it just happens. And it happens if you focus your presentation on the new knowledge and why it's important. If instead you say, I spent 3 months writing this subroutine and here's the list of features in my software, that doesn't get across, usually, the novelty or the importance of the work that you've done. So really focusing on that is what makes the presentations, I think, go the best. So the real challenge in all this is for us to keep our minds open, to understand how we can do good research, how that's going to change, because it's going to change. It is changing already. And to figure out what those new kinds of contributions are. We're doing it. It's happening in different tracks, but we've got to keep doing it and do a good job of it. So good luck to us all, and I look forward to the conversations we'll have after these prepared presentations. Thanks.
Okay, hello everyone. Thanks, David, for some inspiring remarks. Good publishing, I mean, that's very important. So here's my contribution to this panel that I was invited to talk about, the death of scientific visualization. So what is going on here? I think I have the death of my laptop. I don't get any signal. What's going on here? Okay, the death panel. So that's what, that's actually Bob coined that term in his email. That got my attention, that's why I didn't delete the email. So, you know, if you live in the United States, then you probably know the Obama death panel. And I just typed in death panel in the you know, Google image, and I got a few cartoons like this. And, you know, it says like, you know, it was like this like in the few years ago when Obamacare was introduced, the Republicans or any opposers were saying they were just going to have like a death panel of people that judge if an old person has to die or not, right? So he was like, stop, we couldn't do anything for you, grandma, but we wouldn't have wanted to be a burden to the system. We didn't want to have to be a burden to the system. Okay, and this is sort of like SciVis now, right? At least that's what the panel's theme is, right? But look at the right-hand side. Help, I'm still alive. Grandma is not dead. So, okay. So here, help is still alive. So let's talk about this a little bit. So Bob, that was actually on the header of the email that he sent to me when he invited me to the panel. This graph that shows about the citation history from the citation site at GitHub. Okay, when you look at this, I looked at it immediately, and I'm a positive thinking person. Okay, I see like there's a trough there, 2013, and there's a height in 2005. I think I had a paper there, and but when you look at it, there's a period, right? 2095 is about the same level. Then 2015, 16 actually, look, there wasn't data on 2016, right? You can see this, the number of published papers. This like goes down, it's like bulging out. Then 2005 is the height, and it goes down, and now it goes up again. So there's a period, okay? So 20 years. And then it's amazing when you type in 20-year period, you'll arrive at the 20-year cycle of fashion. It's actually, there is a cycle. It's a well-defined cycle. It's science, right? It's over and over, 20 years, 20 years. And you know that when you look at these things, and I live in New York, so I'm like sort of at the pulse of fashion. If you live in LA maybe too. I see a lot of reappearance of Doc Martens shoes. I mean, I lived long enough to know Doc Martens and actually own an old pair that I can now pull out and wear again. And flannel shirts, actually I do have a flannel shirt, I can wear that again. Baby doll dress, I don't really own a baby doll dress. Platform shoes, I think I have some higher heels because I'm vertically challenged, so I have a little higher, but I wouldn't call them platform shoes. Bell bottoms, I used to have bell bottoms. They're coming back, so it's amazing. You can actually see this in the streets. You can see people that wear bell bottoms. And chokers, I actually don't know what that is. Crop top, fringes. Or maybe I'm not that fashionable that I think I am. So new in 2016, bell bottoms. At Target for $24, $24.99, you can buy them. There is Doc Martens on the bottom. That's a model on a runway, and Doc Martens. And as I typed this in, Google is just like a treasure trove of interesting things. So, there's actually someone named Emma, and she was 2, and she looked like this in 1996. And then they had a picture of her in 2022. Exact same look. Flannel, the same flannel. I don't know if this is made up. The mom posted that. Actually, it wasn't Emma, it was the mom's. It was mom's. So I looked up a little more, and I found this hipster fashion cycle, which is when you apply. So let's see this about hats. Okay, let's see. Hat is like a SciVis paper. Then you'll see here. 2015, that was like 2005 is like the mainstream. Remember I told you this was like the peak of SciVis. Had a lot of papers there. Mainstream, the masses catch on, because before there wasn't, right? Masses catch on, and everyone wears the hat now. Everyone's sending a SciVis paper. And it goes down, there's a decline. We saw the decline. The hat peaks in popularity and loses some favor, because now everyone thinks, SciVis is too much. And then the rejection rate was probably higher, and they thought, let's look for something else. I need tenure, I need to write something that get accepted. So they moved in other domains. There wasn't, I think VAST was just coming, right? And InfoVis and stuff like this. And then this one is good, iconic. Oh, sorry, I'm going backwards. Ironic, that's actually a few people start wearing the unpopular hat as a joke. So if you published a paper 2011 in SciVis, you were actually a jokester. This is just what this okay, I'm not saying you are actually one, but according to the hipster cycle, you are. And then 2016, then you go to the nostalgic cycle, and then we go to the conservative one. This hat has become a genuine article of sensible fashion and a sign of good taste. Okay, so all of you guys have published in 2016, you got good taste, it's good. But, you're still away from it, right? So we're now going 2020. I think this may be a little compressed or accelerated. It's up to us, actually. Become an outsider. Someone bored with conservative fashion wear a new hat that the majority of people, wears a new hat that the majority of people find in poor taste. Okay, and I think this is actually the break point, right? This is where innovation happens, because you're writing a paper that maybe gets even rejected. It's so visionary that it gets rejected by the reviewers. Okay, it's so amazing, and then later on, so, you know, I have 2 papers. No, just kidding. Like that, you know, that later wins the best poster award because, you know, you compress it down a little bit, make it more palatable, have a little more work to make it a little more enamable to the audience. These papers happen, you know, when you look at MRI, the NIH proposal was denied and it became like a mainstream technology, right, and stuff like this, right? So these things always happen. You have an innovative idea, it's completely out of the box. Most people reject it because they're still in this other cycle, right, in the ironic and mainstream, right, from the past, right? So basically that's the opportunity, right? So we're still a little bit away from here, like 2025, actually we're back in mainstream. Maybe we can accelerate a little bit, sounds a little bit depressing, but you know, we can probably accelerate a little bit. And where we go back into mainstream, that's, I have a positive aspect of this. So I want to tell you a little bit what my thoughts are, how to actually achieve this and maybe accelerate this a little bit. So there's something called reimagination, right, where you actually reimagine something. Like those Doc Martens, okay, they haven't really changed, but those bell bottoms, they look different than they looked like 20 years ago or in the 70s, 20 years before that. Like by fashion never returns exactly, there's reimagined by driven by parallel trends and innovations, okay? There's always something else going on that influences this particular trend. So that just means you just can't pull out the bell bottoms from your closet from a long time ago, take the mothballs away and then wear them again. So unfortunately, they don't look just the same. So I have this Mini car, for example, right? This is the Mini from a long time ago, Mini Cooper, and this is the Mini Cooper now. You can see the Mini Cooper has grown. It has become much more like modern looking, curvier a little bit, you know, a little more amenable to the current, you know, look of cars, and bigger wheels, and then you know, this actually, it's like this guy is actually failed. I had a friend who had one like this. I mean, I don't know how he got into this car like this. But anyway, now that you can get in much easier, so they got a little bigger, more roomier. You know, they got more technology now, sensing technology, self-cruise control, even self-parking, all these dashboards, you know, they're now OLED displays, and many more things. They've like got the new look, right? When you look at the old Corvette Camaro, the Camaros and the new Camaros, they look like the old Camaros, but they got so much more stuff in them now, right? So they're like reimagined with new technology, refashioned, and so on, right? So for SciVis, what can you do? Like you need new trends will reinforce reimagination. Like there's now, as David also said, there's data science. There's lots and lots of data that you need new stuff for that. There's VR, virtual reality, there's augmented reality, all these new gadgets, right? You know, fashion always, people wear gadgets, and those gadgets are new, right? Now the bell bottoms come with the Apple Watch, right? They don't longer have a digital watch, right? Now they have an Apple Watch, right? And stuff like this, right? So there's new gadgets that accessorize these old trends and make them look new, right? So you know, this is our chance, right? There's Oculus Rift, Google Glass. Why not, you know, we can't do this with Google. We have to just adapt to these things, right? New York Times had this beautiful, you know, this new beautiful series on panorama view with the iPhone, right? We can do this with SciVis data too, and then become appealing to the mainstream, right? So right now we look maybe a little odd to our own community, but to the mainstream we are looking. They will all start copying us, right? So they will embrace this. So fashion also commonly borrows from other fashion, right? So we can do, you know, D3, we can all use D3, which is like InfoVis technique. You know, we can use that in SciVis, why not? We can do volume rendering. We can even port our techniques to the other field, like we can do volume rendering in InfoVis. We're working on that kind of stuff. Machine learning, we can all incorporate machine learning, predictive user interfaces. All of this stuff can come in to SciVis and make a difference and reimagine the field, okay, for its own style and intensity. So what we need innovative designers. We need actually conferences, calls for paper, committees, chairs that embrace these kind of things, right? That don't just say, oh, this is an InfoVis paper, this can't be here. We want to do only fluid dynamics and we want to look at flow fields. No, they need to invite this stuff, put it in a call for papers, and when these papers actually come, embrace them and accept them, right? And then make session titles that have that in it, so people so people see this in the program and come over to the session and become friends with SciVis and then contribute, right? Steering committee members, very important, right? Steering committee has to be very aware. I've served for a long time on steering committees. I'm no longer serving, but so my appeal goes to these people that do this to really embrace this. And we also need daring fashionistas, that's you. Those are the authors who enthusiastically actually embrace these new trends and send their papers to SciVis and make it, I'm not a Trump supporter, but make it great again. You know, synergize and pre-inspired designers. Okay, don't get me wrong. So my closing statement is, arguably the name SciVis does sound a little old-fashioned, okay? So I remember when SciVis came up, we all thought, but it is old. Bell-bottoms sound old-fashioned too, but you know, people wear them. They even call them bell-bottoms and Doc Martens, right? So this stuff, it doesn't mean it's old, it's dated. It just means it has a good history. Then some may think that Sci is less cool than Info. Sci, you know, it's a little bit like, oh, we need math and integrals and things like the Info, you just plot a few dots, you know. I do InfoVis too, so, you know, but now we have data science, you know, we can large data, we can put this in there, we can emphasize in the Sci, we can emphasize data science, and then informational data science, right? So it's, you know, we can do all this, right? So data science is the new twist that's making SciVis cool and fashionable again, right? So data science is actually our chance. And also for grant funding and so on, right? We can bring all this in. And then, okay, so go SciVis fashionistas designers, do it. And next year and so on, go up in the hipster cycle and move up to the top again. Okay, that's it. Thank you very much. Oh, yeah, Han-Wei. Yep.
All right, so my name is Han-Wei Shen. So I'm gonna, I suppose this is a desk panel, you're the juror, and I need to really try to be a lawyer, try to argue and why you should save yourself's life, our life. Okay, so I'm gonna look at this thing from different facts, okay? So that is SciVis really dying? I cannot tell you yes or no, but I'm gonna try to present you some kind of numbers on fact, and we can decide together after this panel. So first one, I've been seeing some people using citation numbers, but citation number is sometimes misleading because if we reject every paper, there's no citation, and as we know, right? So in a way, maybe I think we should look at the summation numbers. So what I did, I went to my laptop, I checked all my email in the back because I have to manually dig up all the numbers. So as you know, in 2012, we were converted from a VIS conference to a SciVis conference. So as you can see, in 2010 and 11, the second column, we had summation about 180, 190. But keep in mind, back then, there was SciVis as well as a few of InfoVis paper. Even though there was an InfoVis conference, people still submit to VIS as a main conference. Now, you can see the number drops after 2012 to 154. That's the year we actually officially moved into SciVis conference. Then if you look at the line chart in the bottom, actually the number is actually not plunging down. It's actually stabilized. The first year is 154, then we got 120. So this year is actually not the lowest, I want to argue. So actually 2013, for some reason, we only get 126 submissions. Then the number climbed up, then go down. So this became a very natural trend. But one thing I want to remind you guys is that there was a LDAF. So many people actually originally submitted to SciVis, they found out LDAF is a better fit because they are working on large data. Those papers could have been submitted to SciVis. So I put it down, if you add together, it actually went back to before 2011, and actually without including any InfoVis papers. So what I want to argue is that even though the citations, maybe is going down, I don't necessarily think the submissions or people working on the field is going down. So that's my first thing I want to present to you. Second of all, I want to speak from the market. People say, hey, InfoVis and the VAST, they have 200 submissions, 170 submissions. You guys have about 110, 20, 30. Now, well, we are working on SciVis problem, right? If you're working on SciVis problem, you need to consider what's the population of a scientist. You cannot expect everybody to work on a science problem. So actually, I went to this Population Reference Bureau. So actually, in 2012, they report number about the workforce. They actually look at the U.S. scientists and engineers workforce ratio. And you can see it has been very stable, 5%. So meaning in the entire United States, I'm pretty sure it's going to be similar in other countries, 5% of the population working in scientific or engineering problems. So if there are 5% of people working on science problem, you're not going to expect people, we have 60% of people working on SciVis problem, right? So I would just say this is actually SciVis is a area sometimes harder to get in compared to understand baseball data, NBA data, right? We really need to identify your application, your collaborators. So even in the future when the SciVis paper number is going down or stabilizing a very smaller number, I'm not surprised. But that doesn't mean that we should be sentenced to death. Next. So maybe people argue, say, hey, you guys have nothing to work on. There's no challenges. So I went to a paper published in 2012 by Pak Wang, myself, Chairman Chen, and Chris Johnson, and Rob Ross about the top 10 challenges of visual analytics, not just SciVis. So if you read through it, you're going to find out, hey, in situ, interaction, large data, databases, algorithms, data movement, uncertainty, parallelism. So anything I point here, I hope you agree they are actually SciVis problems. Meaning if anybody tries to say, there's not much challenges left, but we need to go back to read that 2012 paper, those top 10 challenges, I strongly believe there are still challenges even now. So our job is not done, so we should not just retire and waiting for death to come. Now, people might say, okay, the challenges are here, and you have not, you run out your tricks. You just couldn't figure out any way to solve them. So I think the best way to look at it is probably looking at the topics. Now, I was in this excellent talk yesterday by Petra Eisenberg et al., that keyword KeyVis. That's something I wanted to do myself, and I'm glad to see has been done by other people. So I just, they have this website, very nice website. So I just, as I was listening to the talk, I type in some keywords. So let's see what we find out. So I type violent rendering. So there's like 137 papers. This is, keep in mind, this is author keywords. Sometimes authors are not, they just not necessarily type everything. Like my student, a lot of them, they are sloppy. They just type something and they claim they are done. Actually, they're not comprehensive, but that's okay. So this is only author's keyword. So as you can see, violent rendering got peaked at about 2006. And then it went down. Fine, maybe that's a bad sign. So let me type isosurface. Almost same thing, 2004, it got peaked. I think that's a time, I would say, the basic techniques got mature, right? Then go up, there are a lot of problems unsolved, then we get a peak, and then people start running out of idea, then it went down. Fine. Then I check FlowVis, similar trend, but FlowVis has a little bit uniform distributions, because I think people are still working on FlowVis. We still have FlowVis, FactorVis sections. Then I say, that's not very encouraging me for this panel. Then I say, why don't I type another word, visual analytics. And this is what we got. You can see there's nothing, absolutely nothing before 2000, well, something before 2006, but it really picks up, continue. And I start to remember, even now, my paper, I put a visual analytics, because that's what people think what visualization is all about. We are analyzing data. We're not just doing some rendering. So that doesn't mean say anything. That doesn't mean that SciVis become irrelevant, because all the three conferences should belong to the same conference. Everybody is doing visual analytics. So that doesn't mean much. Now, so I decided to look at my own. So I say, well, if people say you guys are running out of ideas, now I say, okay, why don't I look at myself, what I've been doing in the past, actually 3 decades. So I'm going to look at my just, as an example, I can track anybody for their career and see what they're doing. Maybe try to figure it out. Maybe, yes, indeed, people who are used to be diehard SciVis researchers, they're not anymore because they have nothing to to do. So, because I know myself, right? So I can just give you. So a little bit about myself. I went to Stony Brook on the RE in 1990. That was the first IEEE VIS conference. I spent 2 years there. Then I went to Utah on the Chris Johnson for 4 years. And then I went to NASA Ames. Actually, if you don't know, in 90s, NASA Ames had peak time. All my colleagues, when I present FlowVis paper, the whole room is packed. People have to stand outside. Then I went to Ohio State for that, spent my last 17 years. So I just want to lend you my background. So what I've been doing in the past 3 decades and continue to still feel very, very enthusiastic about it. So for the first decade, that was my, the student time and also my first job, NASA Ames. I most spent my time on speeding up existing algorithm. Of course, that's because I was a graduate student. I tried to learn, and in the meantime, I tried to think about what I should publish. So what did I do? Volume rendering, isosurface, FlowVis, those are algorithms just being proposed or just being invented. So of course, there's a lot of little things to work on. So for example, this actually, I dig out the proceeding, I took pictures. Now, so this, so for example, when I saw my advisor, Chris Johnson, showing me his animation about this biomatic simulation, I asked him, how do you get those animations? He said, I generate 1 frame by 1 frame at a time. So I said, well, obviously there's a need for quicker algorithms. So my first paper was about something called differential volume rendering, about how to do a volume animation quick. Then in the 90s, there was a lot of work on isosurface extraction. So then I was very lucky. So working with my colleague, we work on sponge space problem. And in the meantime, there's so many other papers like Bajaj and Pascucci, and then Ito and Signoli. And of course, in the end of the 90s, the algorithm pretty much stabilized there. So, and also time varying data, for volume rendering for isosurface, and also that was when the leak was proposed. So this is my first decade. I spent my time enhancing existing algorithms to make them more useful. Now, the second decade, there's a lot of work to be done. I continue to improve the existing algorithm, but I sort of got bored. The second decade, I was at Ohio State. So I started to come up with, think about, when we always play the same data set again, again, how much information is there? When are we done? So I was thinking about this 10 years ago. So what I did was, okay, so in the meantime, I tried to make a leak prettier by adding different appearance. And I tried to make a seed placement algorithm so that it become more easier to use. And then also I tried to improve volume rendering. But in the meantime, I said, well, we got to have some theory, because you don't know how much you have already learned from data set. So that's actually when I started working with my student, working on information theory, because information theory will quantify the amount of information in the data set. And then from there, actually, I found a lot of things can be done and continue to the third decade of my research. So in the third decade, we had this new theory. No, old theory was taken from other field, applied to visualization. But I realized it can be applied to level data selection, multivariate, seed placement, everything. So in the third decade, that's the half of this 10 years, then I continued to expand it. Then as a SciVis person, we can never escape from big data problem. Data only gets bigger and bigger and bigger. So I went back to parallel this, parallel that. So I'm going to show you. And finally, the data gets too big. I tell myself, we cannot live with the old way of data anymore. So I started working more on the statistics and distribution. So then, you can see here, right? As I go, I have not done much about rendering, isosurface. So even the picture here you see is more like a VAST, more like information visualization. Because, okay, I need to expand the theory of information theory to, flow, seed placement, multivariate. That's the challenging problem. And then, because I started working on distribution, because I don't think we should work on raw data, we can't afford to do it anymore. So then there's a histogram issue, and there's how do you do feature tracking, not using the raw data? How do you do flow analysis, not using the raw data? And then back to this big data problem, then we still need to work on load balancing, flow guided. They are not solved because, in particular, in my third decade, even the second decade, I work a lot with DOE people. DOE labs, they produce bigger and bigger computers, and there's a lot of problems to be solved. And then, like this, and also in situ, that this year we have, Ohio State has an honorable mention paper. We are actually using distributions, the new representation, in situ to perhaps solve an old problem. How do you detect jet engine stall? But this is a domain-specific problem. And there are always emerging technology. Like my student, I cannot hold them. They want to play with VR glasses. Okay, go ahead. So they try to find a way to use it. So I would say this is actually the keyword. You don't need the resource. This is the keyword from my own paper. As you can see, from the first decade, second, third, the work continued to expand. And I can share with you, the first decade, there was one PhD graduated. That was myself. And the second decade, I graduated 7. In the third decade, only halfway I graduate 11. So as you can see, anybody declare SciVis is dead is insane because there are so many new problems to work on and there are so many new people being produced, and I think we're just gonna keep going. So, well, this is the end of my defense for my client. So if you look at the number, the size, the challenge, and the topics, so this is my claim. This is my declare. There's no way it's near its death. Then maybe let's talk about it after 10 years from now. Thank you.
Okay. I had a lot of interesting tables and diagrams and graphs, but they've been used up, so I skipped those. The title I picked here is Introduction to Qualitative Introspection. I really like the template. It had introduction to, so this is going to be a short introduction to introspection from my perspective. You know, the first question that popped into my head when Bob asked me to be on this panel is like, why me? Why would you like me to talk? I mean, and one of the people who are running in this field, and why would you? And I realized that, you know, maybe he just found a picture of me. So maybe this is, I'm dealing a lot with this kind of death, but it's another thing. And virtual autopsies. This is the worst picture of me ever, I think. But it's been circulated out there. So I'm going to provide you with two different introspections and from a qualitative perspective, and try to stick out my neck a little bit and see what happens. Now, the first one is really about SciVis and what it's all about, and I'm going to problematize a little bit about the concept of SciVis and what it is. And when I do that, if I ask myself the question, is SciVis dead? So one of the things I sometimes do, you know, a few weeks ago I started thinking about this, and I was sitting in my office. What am I going to say about this? So I found on Skype, I found one of my smart collaborators, Matt Cooper. I think he's sitting in here. So I popped the question to him, Matt, what would you think about the death of SciVis? And his answer was immediate and very insightful, I think. It was one of the best answers I've had to this question. The answer was 42. And the meaning, there's a lot of meaning behind his answer, because it really means that this is a question that is ill-posed. An ill-posed question, and you have to frame the question to get a well-defined answer. So the answer for me is of course 42. Now, why are we thinking this way? Well, if you look up the definition of visualization or scientific visualization, you find in the dictionaries, you find two different meanings of the word visualization. The first one is that you form a mental image. You know, the example, it's not easy to visualize the future. The second one is to make something visible to the eye. And that second example there, we as a community will have to make them change that one because it's not about dying things anyway. But what does this really mean? You know, and if you take this definition and you start listening to how people are talking about scientific visualization, I hear words when I walk around in the corridor, even in the presentations, I hear people saying things like, we made a visualization. Or they talk about the visualization shows. I would say, let's try to get rid of those phrases. Let's not use visualization in that context because it conveys a false image of what visualization is. Visualization is the process. It's the process of generating some sort of mental image inside of the head. It's not the picture in itself. Referring to something as a visualization, it just leads to thought in the wrong way. So let's, as a community, stop doing that. That's my first question or plead. Now, if you look at, you know, sometimes when I teach, I use this sort of the standard view of the visualization pipeline. You've all seen this to death in many cases. So, and if you think about, you know, the definition of what it is that we're doing, when I'm out there and I'm talking to, there are thousands of users out there that are interested in talking to us, but primarily they come and they talk to me about things that are at the far end. You know, they have data, they have lots of data, and it's coming from all different sources. Recently I'm talking to the National Police Force about, you know, their data flow pipelines and what they want to do about it, okay? Is this VIS, is this SciVis to be out there and talking to these people? There's a big question about that. Next one is, the people that I talk to in terms of that I see as my peers now are the ones that are doing signal processing, machine intelligence, artificial intelligence, everything like that. That's a domain that has a huge impact on visualization. But in some sense, we're defining that away from us, which is strange because we're in the business of making tools for visualization. At the same way we have on the interaction side, we have people that are doing a lot of interesting user interfaces, and we as a SciVis community are not really dealing with that either. So we tend to stick in the middle. We feel safe and happy on the rendering side. And if you define visualization as primarily dealing with the rendering side, then I would say, yes, we're dead, because we can do that. But the challenge is, how do we move beyond that? We should be working all over the place. We should be dealing with all these aspects. It doesn't matter where the actual method comes from. We're integrating the tools. And this is a part of SciVis. And I see that happening in other communities. And this is something that we need to address in sort of an open discussion. How do we embrace all these other aspects of scientific visualization and to provide the tools that we have? So to summarize the first introspection, we are not in the business of creating visualizations. We are developing tools and methods that support visualization, whether that's rendering, whether that's interaction, whether that's data analysis, machine learning, intelligence, whatever it is. Those are the tools that we are using to assemble things that support the process of visualization. Now, the second introspection is something that I'm thinking a lot about, and that's defining what is something that's good. And I think this is pertinent, especially to the scientific visualization community, because we do seem to have a trend of being very critical to each other. And let me give an example, and this is completely qualitative. I have no beautiful statistics supporting my claims here, but I'll do it anyway. This is SciVis 20 years ago, the way I perceive it from being in here publishing, reviewing papers. If you look at the dynamic range in quality, papers that are submitted to our conferences, they range from terrible to excellent, right? And there's a nice distribution. And as a papers chair, as a reviewer, you sit there and you try to define what is acceptable and what's not acceptable. And you just say, okay, we define something, okay? So you end up on one side or the other. 20 years ago, that was a pretty fair process. That's my view of the whole situation, that we could do this in a reasonably well-defined way. What has happened in 20 years? In a maturing community, and maybe the SciVis community, out of all the visualization communities, we are the most mature community, right? What happens when a community is maturing? Well, you're condensing the dynamic range. So everything ends up in the middle. There's still the Hamish Carr who's out on the right side all the time. He's got the excellent papers. He's been getting the best paper award all the time. And there are a few people that we don't know. They're out on the left side. But most of us are just in the middle. We're good. So what happens then? Well, as a papers chair, you sit there and you say, okay, fine. These are the papers that get in and these are the papers that are out. And that process becomes pretty much a random selection. And that's why you sit there and you're furious with the reviewers, because you think you have a good paper. And you should make it, but it doesn't, because you happen to be on the wrong side. And if we're reinforcing the acceptance rates that we have today, most of those papers are going to be rejected. So my viewpoint on this, and this is where I'm sticking out my neck a little bit in this community, and I know there are a few people who will strongly disagree with me, is that too many good papers are rejected multiple times, and I keep reviewing the same paper over and over again for different journals, different conferences. And they improve slightly in between, so it's a good process from that view, but it's very expensive, extremely expensive in terms of reviewing and writing. The acceptance rate is a very poor measure of quality. What are we thinking? It's the most artificial measure you can ever imagine. I could volunteer to submit 10 very bad papers. You can reject them all and the acceptance rate will be better. Why are we using acceptance rate? The number of available slots at the conferences should not limit the number of papers that we are publishing. And this is particularly true for the SciVis community when we have this problem with the condensed range. We should have more papers that are being published. How do we do that? Well, we should learn from other communities that are more journal-driven. They are having, I come to the conference here. Where is the most energy you find at the conference? Well, it's in the workshops and perhaps in the panels. I hope in this one, even though it's on death. This is where the things are happening. It's not in the paper sessions. They're interesting. They're very good. But it's very junior people who are presenting their work to a very senior community. That's kind of strange. Why don't we have senior people talk about their visions instead? That would be much more interesting. So more discussions, perhaps less on paper presentations, even though they're interesting, but they're online. Okay. Now, other communities are doing this, and you know, for those of you who know me, I grew up in the physics community. And you know, if there's any community that's dead, it's physics. Physics is a dead community in many ways, but it's still a vibrant community, and there are many different reasons for that. I mean, they have the Nobel Prize. We don't have that, but one thing that they're doing is that they have lots of journals. Their meetings are primarily based on discussions, on presentations of ideas, visions, everything like that. And the journals, you know, they have the Physical Review. That's where I published a lot of my stuff before, Physical Review A. And they fill it up, so it's filled with pretty good papers. You know, the dynamic range in physics is just there in the middle. What did they do? Well, they spawn more journals. So they have Physical Review A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and so on. Okay? And for the best papers, they invent Physical Review letters. And to summarize their work, they have reviews of modern physics. Maybe this is a model that we should be thinking about. Now, going back to the death of scientific visualization. Now, these are the items if you extract them from Bill's paper. Now, visualization alone is not a solution. Check, I would agree with that. But the quotes mean that it's perhaps the wrong definition that he's using in this paper as well. Visualization is a critical part of many applications. Yes, of course. Check, very good. That's the way it should be. This one, the community lacks application domain knowledge. I would disagree. And that's maybe one of the big changes that has happened in the past 10 years, that we are more and more aware of the application domain knowledge. And you know, things like VAST is an example of that. Some of the papers that are coming into the SciVis conference is also examples of that. Visualization, again in quotes, has become commodity. Great, I agree. Wonderful. We don't have to deal with that anymore. We can do volume rendering on the GPU, and that's out there. We don't have to deal with that. We can focus our efforts on other things, and that's what we need to do. Okay, visualization is not having an impact in applications. I would strongly disagree, and I wish that Bill would be here, because I would show him this picture. This is the only picture of my own work I'm going to show you. So here's one of our touch tables. Here's marching cubes and volume rendering together at the same time with millions of users of the next generation of researchers. And it's out there, it's being used. It has a huge impact. So, is SciVis dead? You know, this is the ultimate question. And I know that you probably haven't seen this. Let me see. This is Max von Sydow and the Seventh Seal, and he's playing chess with death. So it's all in Swedish, you know, so you probably wouldn't understand what he's saying. But in the free translation, if you think about our community, are we talking about the death here or not? No. I would like them to talk more about the need for tools and for multiple scattering in the clouds. All right, thank you very much.